BibleWorm is on hiatus for the summer. We'll be back with new narrative lectionary episodes beginning August 31st for regular listeners and August 24th for subscribers. In the meantime, we hope you'll enjoy this episode from our Creation Care series, which first aired in summer 2024.
BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, director of lifelong learning and music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week, we continue on in our summer series on creation care with Job 38, 1-38, in which God speaks to Job from the whirlwind, reminding Job of the beauty, grandeur, and complexity of nature that is beyond human understanding. Where humans were said to have dominion over the world in Genesis 1, in Job 38, humans seem almost irrelevant. God guides the constellations, God nurtures the sea, God sends the lightning bolts on their courses, and they respond, "Here I am." This text invites us to lean into our not knowing, to relinquish our supposed mastery of the universe, to revel in its complex beauty. More than that, it reminds us that in a world often marked by suffering, we are not alone. There is a whole world before us and around us, alive with responsiveness to God, truly a balm for the soul. Thanks for joining us. Amen.
That is the best greeting I have ever gotten. That was really very good.
Yeah, it was sort of tuneless, but there was some tune in my head. It was changes, time to change the changes.
Summer Bobby is a little something extra. I love it. It's good.
A little something extra. That is so well said. Well, how are you, Amy?
I am fine. There's my answer. I'm fine.
That was amazing banter.
I mean, like one of my kids is graduating this season from high school, and
oh yeah,
so everything feels a little like, swirly, and like everything has the capacity to become some kind of big, like nostalgic mess, or else some kind of big logistical tragedy if you didn't fill in, like hand in this form on time, but also remember your sweet baby, and also let's reflect on the mistakes you made parenting him that he will take into his next chapter. But also, whatever. So I'm kind of like living in that world.
Yeah, that is quite a world to live in.
But it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
It is a good thing to move on to the next chapter.
Yeah, I get a little teeny version of that at the end of every academic year, where, you started the year with all these like abstract hopes for what the year could be, and then the year becomes a thing, and then, it is what it is. Like there's beauty to it, and there's complication to it, and so it's a little bit exciting and a little bit sad.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's a nice way of framing that it is, like you start with infinite potential, and there is both beauty and loss as that comes not to be potential, but to be actual. Yes. And also limited.
Yes. And I, being a 4, I don't know if this is a 4 thing or not, but I prefer to live in a world of potentialities, not a world of actualities. And so I often find the real world very difficult.
I do remember you in graduate school as someone who would like literally edit and rewrite papers forever.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still don't know how you did that. Like I edit my papers somewhat, but after a while I'm like, okay, there she blows. She's done.
I don't remember myself that way, but that might well be.
Maybe it was just in contrast to me.
I will say that I think the editor of my current book would probably agree with you that the forever part anyway Yes, but that is a problem for another day that is going to cause me existential angst if we talk about it any further. So,
Great, let's stop.
Let's talk about something that will not generate existential angst, which is the book of Job.
No angst here,
No angst
folks.
there.
None.
I teach a class at Hendrix called Skeptics in Scripture, and it's a semester of Ecclesiastes and then Job. And so it is a very angsty class. But it brings up there's some beautiful things to think about in the book of Job. Today we are in Job 38, 1 to 38. We originally announced it as 4 to 38, but then, who can just leave 3 verses hanging out there? So
we're expanding the reading that we ourselves
expanding our
put
own.
together.
Yeah. Welcome to BibleWorm. So in our series that we're doing with Spirit and Truth, the theme that they're working on, so Spirit and Truth is working its way basically through Genesis 1 and thinking about responsibility for different parts of creation. So in their series this week, they're thinking about care for the air and the sky. We're thinking about Job 38, 1 to 38, which we're going to read a little bit through the lens of air and sky because it has lots of cosmological and astronomical and meteorological phenomena described in it. But for our part of the series, at least as I'm conceiving of it, we're a little bit just thinking about different ways that creation is presented in the Hebrew scriptures and what that can help us think about in terms of creation, with maybe like a little emphasis on air and sky. Is that kind of how you're approaching it? We probably should have talked about this before we were recording.
John, no, I'm doing something totally different. No, I think that's just right. And it's funny. I will confess openly, though I probably shouldn't. I don't know as much about. I haven't spent a whole lot of time with the Book of Job.
Yeah,
we didn't have a class in it in graduate school, and you teach a class in it now, but I sure don't. And so it really was quite a gift to spend time, like some real time with chapter 38.
Yeah.
In particular, I think because Job is really known for not this chapter.
Right.
Job is known for the enormity of human suffering that this man who seems to be a righteous man, Job, experiences, and that existential question you mentioned of why is this happening?
Yeah.
How can this be happening? This doesn't seem to be how the world should work. And when we get to this chapter, I don't know, we get to hear sort of God's first entrance into the conversation, entrance into it's a response, but it's not quite, this is how God responds. But I don't know, I'm feeling very grateful to have spent some time with 38 in preparation, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about it.
Well, I hope we will feel that way in an hour when we have, when this potential thing has become an actuality and we are filled with the awareness of what it has become. No, that's a lovely introduction to the book of Job, Amy. I think the narrative of Job is kind of familiar to many people, even maybe people who are not Bible readers. Like South Park did an episode in which
you've heard of it at least. Yeah.
Job throughout the book is kind of wishing he could talk to God. If I could just make my case to God, look what is happening to me. That either God would say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize," or that God would at the very least explain what the reasoning is for Job's suffering. But instead, the beauty part is Job actually does get to talk to God face to face.
Yeah.
And this is what we're reading today. That speech goes from chapter 38 through 41. So we're reading just the very first piece of what God says to Job. In response to this question of human suffering and divine justice that Job has been raising throughout the book, God tells a creation story, which is such an interesting way to respond to that kind of question.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? I feel like we could talk about the book of Job for like a week and a half.
I know, we could. we absolutely could. But I think that's enough to sort of ground us to start wrestling with what this chapter offers.
So Job has said, "I wish I could talk to God and demonstrate my innocence." Then we pick up in 38:1. I'm reading in the Common English Bible. Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, "Who is this darkening counsel with words lacking knowledge? Prepare yourself like a man. I will interrogate you, and you will respond to me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you know. Who set its measurements? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring tape on it? On what were its footings sunk? Who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang in unison and all the divine beings shouted. Who enclosed the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the cloud its garment, the dense clouds its wrap? When I imposed my limit for it, put on a bar and doors, and said, you may come this far, no further. Here your proud waves stop. So, Amy, God shows up to Job here, and the first image we get that's sort of going to set the tone of this conversation is that God shows up in a whirlwind. Do you have thoughts about that image of God in the whirlwind?
You know, my first thought was actually at least in my translation, there's a definite article. I should look at the Hebrew itself. And so I guess in some ways I was reading it as like sort of having one foot in metaphor, like Job is in a whirlwind, and God, shows up out of that sort of whirlwind. But it also, I feel like, is transitioning us into this conversation about the sky and the air and the storms and all of that. But when I first encounter it there at the beginning, I guess I'm connecting it to what came before.
Yeah. So Job's, like chapters 1 to 37 have been Job's personal whirlwind.
Job's personal whirlwind. Yeah. I mean, my translation is tempest, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I guess it seems like something that would be a metaphor.
Yeah. The word in Hebrew, sarah, means, I think it could be metaphor. It means literally like a whirlwind or a thunderstorm or something like that. Yeah. But I think one can read it. Tempest is kind of an interesting translation. One can read it certainly as a whirlwind. I read it as sort of like, here's the storm god riding on the tornado or on the hurricane. In my head, it always reminds me of the story of Elijah on Mount Horeb, and it's like God is not in the storm. God is not in the wind. Here it's like God is like tornado God coming up or hurricane God. Like this is not a God that's like still and small. This is a God that is like chaotic.
Right. And this is not the like soft place to land God,
Right. Right. Yeah.
This God shows up and says, gird your loins like gever, like a man in my translation, like a strong guy.
Yeah. What does that mean, girding your loins?
Put on your pants.
That's what I translate it for my students is put on your big boy pants and let's step outside.
Yeah, I think of it sort of that way, like, prepare yourself. You could think about it as actually like putting on clothing, or it's sort of metaphorically as like, I think of it as sort of like, when you like sort of brace your core, like, get ready.
Yeah. Quite literally, it's that men often wore long tunics in the ancient world. And so it's hard to fight, or so I'm told.
Yeah.
I'm neither a fighter nor someone who often wears tunics.
Nor a tunic wearer. Mm-hmm.
And so you would pull up your tunic and tie it around your waist so that your legs were more readily usable. And so this was sort of a fighting position.
Interesting.
So God is ready to contend with Job, it seems like. This is not the comforting, gentle God, but the like, let's... Like if you want to argue this thing out, like let's argue it out.
Yeah.
The first thing that God says to Job is, who is this that darkens counsel with words lacking knowledge? So Job throughout the book has been saying, basically action should follow from consequence. Like I'm a good guy, bad stuff is happening to me. God is not just. Or God is at least not acting justly. And God says, who is this darkening counsel lacking knowledge? And then starts talking about creation. And so I'm just so like, do you have thoughts about that move that God makes there?
I think that phrase darkening counsel is so interesting. And like really that's pretty literally what the Hebrew is. And so throughout this whole text where it seems like Job has been asking questions, has been asking for an explanation, I feel like this response is somehow saying like, you're actually like obfuscating the question. Like that is the wrong question. And you are actually taking enlightenment out of the world by focusing on that question. So I'm going to give you something. I'm going to answer you, but we're going to change the question.
So the question you think Job is asking, that's the wrong question. Can you just say like how you think about that?
I mean, in a way that I think is very natural and human when we suffer, especially the enormity of sufferings that Job has endured that I really can't even imagine. You know, if there was a theology in mind that righteousness is rewarded, then his question is very narrowly focused on this case study of his life. Like, how can it be that this is happening to me?
Yeah.
And God is, I think, saying that's the wrong question. Like, you can't, I think, as we'll go on to read, like, you can't narrowly focus. Like, you can't just look at one, like, atomized thing within this system and say, why is that thing happening? Because it's tied to something really quite enormous and expansive that you don't understand.
I know. I really like that way of thinking about it. So in the first instance, it's about Job thinking his own life should make sense. I think there's also sort of an anthropocentrism to Job's position that the world ought to work for human thriving in particular. And in his case, it seems not to be. And so God maybe is in these chapters 38 to 41 is destabilizing a little bit the human-centered view. And then also just saying like, you think you know the way the world is, but you don't really know as much as you think you know. So we get a little bit of a creation text in 4 through 7, which is about laying the foundations and measuring out pulling out the measuring tape and laying the cornerstone. Do you have thoughts about like what image, like how do you imagine that? What do you connect it to?
I love that we're reading this, the week after we read Genesis 1.
Yes.
Because I think I even suggested when we were reading that, like, it almost seems like God is just sort of doing stuff and then stands back and says, like, oh, yeah, I like that. That was good.
Yeah.
And this, I get much more of the, like, meticulous architect or structural engineer that is really attuned to the complexity of this system that they are putting together. It's not the sort of, let's put some paint on the palette and see what happens. But then I love that it ends with when the morning stars sang together.
Yes.
Like it's this juxtaposition of this, carefully measured approach and then surrounded by this like overwhelming joy.
Yes.
But it seems like the measuring had to come first. Like, how you have to practice. I just went to a school concert last night, so this is on my mind. Like y'all got to go practice your instruments at home.
Yes.
So you'll be in tune because something exquisite can happen, but there is precision that has to come before that sort of more flowy part.
Yeah, the flowy part. Yes.
The flowy,
That phrase that you were reading a minute ago in verse 2, darkening counsel, can also be translated, Carol Newsom, who is our teacher, of course, translates that as obscuring design. And so I think the darkening counsel is one way of getting there. And then the sense of like, the world actually does have a design to it and it works the way that it's supposed to. And so here we have an instance of that in which everything is very carefully measured and laid out and firmly founded.
Yeah.
And so you should not think that the world is sort of a random happenstance because it's not. It is very much, the practice has gone into it before the flowy part.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really like here, and we talked about this a little bit in Genesis 1 as well, is that the creation itself, the morning stars and then the divine beings, maybe these are angels or something like that, they're celebrating just the foundations of the world itself without there being humans present in it yet. This reminds me a little bit of the Genesis 1, God calling things good, even before humans had arrived on the scene. Here we have nature that is fully capable of celebrating its own founding, not needing human beings even yet to be there.
Yeah. I love that.
These are framed, and maybe we've already addressed this a little bit, but God is not explaining, like, let me tell you how I created. God is saying, where were you when I did this? Tell me if you know. The implication is you weren't there. You don't know what you're talking about. Do you have thoughts about that sort of rhetorical strategy that God takes here about, where were you when I did these things, and is explaining creation while reminding Job that he was sort of a latecomer to the game?
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts about what God is up to there?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple of different sort of thoughts go through my head. And the first one is just the sort of like, kind of like, shut up, Job. Like, you don't have grounds. You don't have standing to ask. You don't know, you don't have standing.
Yeah.
I don't like that reading. But I think it's certainly there. It's there. It's available to us. I wonder, this is a much more sort of humble idea, or I guess humble is the right word, of God, but something like that, but a little more of a sense of like, you have no idea how much I am holding and how much I am doing.
Yes.
Like, as you're saying, it's not that this is not actually all about you.
Right.
And so I think there could almost be an edge of like, I'm doing so many things and it's a lot and I'm doing them well, and a sort of like, I'm doing the best I can.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that what happened to you is awesome, but like, it can't all be, I don't know. It can't all be without you.
I mean, sometimes when I read this text, I think about like a parent-child relationship, but like really exaggeratedly so.
Yes.
In which your kids often do not understand the complexities of all the things that go into creating and maintaining a life for them. They just sort of get the little immediate thing, like, you made me clean my room or whatever.
Right.
And I read this a little bit that way, that Job is making some claims in which he has a very limited understanding of the big scope of God's care. And so inviting God, I mean, it is a little bit humbling for Job, but I don't read it as like, I'm God, like, shut your pie hole. It's it's like, man, come on, like, you don't understand. You just don't understand yet what you're talking about.
I think that's really helpful. And I love that, especially leading into the next, the idea of God as parent.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that with the sea and the sea is coming out of a womb and being wrapped in a garment? Like, can you just talk about that imagery and what you think is going on there?
I mean, it's just, it's incredible because it starts when, who closed the sea behind doors? So like, okay, fine. Now we're back to that sort of image from Genesis 1 where I get the idea, there's some kind of chaotic water that's been controlled and pushed to the side. But then we get, just such clear birth imagery when it gushed forth from the womb. My translation actually has, when I clothed it in clouds, swaddled it in dense clouds.
Yes.
It just made me sort of stop and pause and think about the sky as God's infant.
Yeah.
Like, that's really mind-blowing to think of that.
Did you mean the sky there?
I did.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Wait, why? Is that crazy?
Well, because it's about the sea, and so then I was trying to make that connection for myself.
Oh, okay. So, it says swaddled it in dense clouds, though. So I I imagine that as this is the sky, this is the Shemayim, like this is the water that has been put above the firmament.
Oh,
That's how I was reading this.
I'm with you now. Yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, I guess you could read it either way. But I had read in the creation story sort of like the water, the chaotic water is this dangerous force to be controlled.
Yeah.
And it does need to have limits here.
Yes.
But I got much more the image of, when it says you may come so far and no farther, here you have to stop. I got the image of like a baby gate. Like,
yes.
That's
exactly
this is the area that is yours. But I don't know, I just felt so much care for these waters that are also being controlled. I don't know. I think this is a mind-blowingly decentering and beautiful image.
I mean, one of the things about, this is the baby imagery here. And when you think to ancient Near Eastern cosmology, which we've talked about before, like the sea is often a monster, right? Tiamat in the ancient Near East, or
yes.
Yam in Canaanite mythology. And so here's the like force of chaos in the world.
Yeah.
But it's like little baby chaos. And it comes forth, like, I don't know, like from the womb. I think maybe you read that as God has given birth to the sea. Maybe you read it as the cosmos itself has given birth to the sea.
Yeah.
Like where exactly the womb belongs, I don't know. But God is clearly the midwife at the very least. And is like little like coochie coo little baby sea. Like here's a diaper, here's your cloud diaper, and here's your baby gate.
Yeah.
This is not, if you think about ancient Near Eastern mythology, it's like God is supposed to vanquish the sea, and that's the sign of God's power. And here it's God is welcoming and nurturing and placing limits on, but like...
Right, but it's so different to think about it as the way you place limits on the chaos of toddlers who are genuinely destructive creatures,
Yeah.
But it's not, to think of those constraints as also showing care for the source of chaos and not only for whatever you're protecting from that chaos, I think is gorgeous.
It's like, but God has baby-proofed creation a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if humans think of the sea as like the scary thing in the world that you kind of wish weren't there, then God has said, no, it has a place too. And so there's a sense in which the sea, the chaos, the unpredictability of creation is part of its beauty and part of what God values about it.
Yes.
Even though it does not always seem immediately to have human value. Like we might rather the world were more predictable, but it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pick up in verse 12. In your lifetime have you commanded the morning, informed the dawn of its place, so it would take hold of earth by its edges and shake the wicked out of it? Do you turn it over like clay for a seal, so it stands out like a colorful garment? Light is withheld from the wicked, the uplifted arm broken. Have you gone to the sea's sources, walked in the chamber of the deep? Have death's gates been revealed to you? Can you see the gates of deep darkness? Have you surveyed earth's expanses? Tell me if you know everything about it. Where is the road to the place where light dwells, darkness where it is located? Can you take it to its territory? Do you know the paths to its house? You know, for you were born then. You have lived such a long time. God's a little snarky right there.
That's so snarky.
Yeah.
That's snarky.
God's got a little bit of attitude in this text, so which I think is kind of interesting. So if we go back to this issue about commanding the morning, and there's that's like verse 13, like take hold of the edges and shake the wicked out of the morning or out of the dawn. Like,
yeah.
That's just such a fascinating image to me.
It is a fascinating image to me. I really sat with that for a moment, and I'm not quite sure what to do with that.
I think that the wicked thrive in the darkness. And so the dawn every morning is like cleansing out the wicked from they're like the little bed bugs of the dawn blanket or whatever, and like you're shaking it out. That's kind of how I've read it anyway. And so there's a sense in which every dawn is sort of like a new moment of creation in which the world is sort of restored to right order, and then it sort of comes apart in the darkness and then is recreated. At least that's sort of how I've come to think about it.
I love that. And I came to sort of a similar image, I guess, of each dawn as a new creation differently. And my translation is pretty different from yours. The Hebrew is challenging.
The Hebrew of the poetry of Job, and especially like the poetry of Job is elevated. And then the poetry of God's speeches in Job is yet still even more elevated because it's divine speech. Yeah. What does your translation do that?
Well, what stood out to me is in verse 14, it says, it changes like clay under the seal till its hues are fixed like those of a garment.
Ooh, I like that.
And I really like that image of the sky changing each morning, like coming into formation again and again each morning. And it will have a place that it fixes for a while, but it just was such a clear, for me, like evocative image of that like beloved hour between when the dawn first starts to break to when, really it's light outside, and it's just constant shifting, like the softness of the sky and the colors and their constant shifting. It really does. It feels like a new creation, and every day you're starting over with the same blank slate and winding up at a pretty similar place, but there's this, I don't know, this forming of it.
I love that imagery, Amy. Because last week we were talking about this, there's a sense in Genesis 1 in which God has created, and sometimes we think God has created once and for always.
Yes.
And we had said, like, what if humans don't maintain the earth, it could come apart. Here we have more of a sense of it, like it does come apart on a daily basis and then is recreated every morning.
Yeah.
And like that sense of like a constant creation and uncreation, like that's really profound.
Yes. And it gives you the sense that that maybe God is actively involved in this every day.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, okay, you need humans to help with creation, but humans are not going to help with this part.
Right. Right. Yeah, so maybe this text may be a little bit saying we might have overestimated our importance to the sustenance of creation in Genesis 1. Like, not that we did, but that Genesis 1 has one view of humans' role, and here is maybe a different one.
Yeah.
I got a little overwhelmed in the sea's sources, the chambers of the deep, and then we were in death's gates and the expanse of the earth. It is just... I felt overwhelmed just reading this. Like, I don't, and then like, if you imagine God, like in a hurricane, like, tell me. So, part of what I get about this is just like the world is exceedingly complex. And I don't know how to answer any one of those questions, at least on the fly. But when they come like back to back to back to back, I just end up thinking like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what is going on. Do you see something different there or any of those images like standing out to you in a particular way?
I think I feel sort of a shift. We've had I've felt this sort of imagery of the sky before this, and now it's really going into the Tehom, like into the deep, like the deepest deep of the deep until you get to the gates of death and the place of darkness.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I would imagine that Job feels like he has seen some of these things, again, metaphorically.
Yeah.
Like, I guess this is suggesting that even if you have experienced it in your own, atomized life, that the mysteries of these these parts of creation that we can't even see. Like, at least I can look up at the sky and see it.
Yes.
I don't really know what to think about the recesses or the
Mm-hmm.
like the inquiries, the searching, like the deepest unknown parts of the Tehom, of the deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels very mysterious and frightening.
The other image here is about the like going to the place where the light dwells and
Yes.
taking it back to its place, like you can just sort of put light on a leash or something and like bring it back to its place. Like there's this sense of which these like enormously just fundamental principles of the universe, the light and darkness, are sort of dependent on God to like lead them around and put them where they go. And the question of like, could you do that? Like, no.
Right. And it's interesting that the image that came out of that for you was sort of like, putting light on a leash and yes, I see that in there. And I, maybe just because of the order in which things unfold here, I imagined leading darkness back to its place.
Yeah.
Which it's the same idea, but just the idea that like darkness has a place in creation.
Yes. And
you have to be able to go there. And even you, Job, who might feel like you dwell in darkness entirely at this time, like you don't know how the system works. Like
right.
you're feeling maybe reverberations of things, but this is not, I'm just babbling at this point. But the idea that darkness has a place and that someone should know how to lead the darkness back to its place.
Yes.
Is I don't know. This poem is mind-blowing.
I really love that way of thinking about it, because when you say that, like I'm thinking of darkness as an absence of light. But that's not the way this poem is thinking about darkness. It is thinking about darkness as an entity unto itself. And I love what you're saying there about like the sea, it has a place, and it needs to stay in its place at the time at the time when it's supposed to be in a certain place. Like that's where it needs to be, and that's what God is capable of doing. But it's not that there's light always, or I'm thinking about, this probably shouldn't be making connections to Revelation, but I'm teaching that class right now. And there is an image in Revelation 21 that when the fullness of creation comes and New Jerusalem comes to earth, one image is there is no more sea, and the other image is that there is no more darkness. And so you have this, like, this is not what that's talking about, right? Both of those things are necessary to the world. And they don't seem to be enemies here. They just seem to be things that have a proper place, and they need to stay in their proper place.
I would not want God's job in this. This sounds like running the wildest preschool ever.
So much work.
Hi, I'm Reverend Joanna Heriter, pastor of Peace Mennonite Church in Lawrence, Kansas. Last year was my first year preaching through the narrative lectionary, and BibleWorm quickly became my first and usually most significant Bible study tool each week. I love the lighthearted yet in-depth textual analysis and the attention to issues of social justice. Sometimes I just want to take Amy and Bobby's closing thoughts and offer that as my sermon. But I don't, I promise. This year, I decided to support BibleWorm financially and join their Patreon at the basic $4 a month level. If you're one of those responsible preachers who start sermon prep more than 5 days before the sermon, you can support at a slightly higher level to get early access to the content. Just go to patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast. Let's all do our little bit to help Bobby and Amy continue creating this valuable resource. And now back to this week's podcast.
So in verse 22, then we move on to meteorological phenomena. Have you gone to snow's storehouses, seen the storehouses of hail that I have reserved for a time of distress, for a day of battle and war? What is the way to the place where light is divided up, the east wind scattered over earth? Who cut a channel for the downpours and a way for blasts of thunder, to bring water to uninhabited land, a desert with no human, to saturate dry wasteland and make grass sprout? Has the rain a father who brought forth drops of dew, From whose belly does ice come? Who gave birth to heaven's frost? Water hardens like stone. The surface of the deep thickens.
Mm.
So this first image here about the storehouses of hail and snow, the place where light is divided and the east wind. My reading of these is that they are destructive forces that are being held back, but that they're in storage, but there's going to be a time when they're needed. Is that how you read it?
Yeah, that's exact. I mean, my translation makes it sound pretty clear, that reading, that these are the things I set aside for a day of war and battle. Like, this is, I'm going to need some hail for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know, it's just such an interesting way for me to think about hail and snow. The verse 24, the place where light is divided up, is in the CEB. I think that's a reference to lightning, maybe, in the context.
That would make sense. For what all is going on in this section of the text.
This is such an interesting way to think about, and I guess this is as an ancient text, those things, they're scary now.
Yeah.
In some sense. Arkansas about this time last year got hit, Little Rock, by a tornado.
Yes.
And I've lived my whole life not really being afraid of storms. And then that hit a little close to home. And now I think about these things now. And so to be in an ancient context where you don't really know where those things are coming from.
It feels really different to me than the kind of image that we got before, or the kind of image that I drew from what came before this in terms of God's relationship to these, parts of creation. Because this feels much more sort of utilitarian, like you are my tools, not like I am your shomer. I am, sort of setting boundaries and helping people stay in their places and sort of relating that way. This is much more, you're at my beck and call.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because these are things that are, there's a different sense of power in these huge storms than there is in the sunrise.
Yes.
And so maybe that's goes along with why the relationship seems to shift here.
Yeah.
These things also aren't constants, whereas
Right.
the other ones are just your regular, those are the foundations and these are the anomalies.
Yes.
But I don't know what else to say about it.
The good news there is that they're in storehouses and they're not just running rampant around.
Yes. Again, which is like putting, the baby gate.
Right, exactly. And I guess the other good news is that God seems to have them in the storehouse for when God needs them. Mm-hmm. And so they are not just, even when they are in the world and not in their storehouses, they are not just randomly so, but they are with God's sort of either invitation or deployment or however you want to think about it.
Yeah.
Which is, so there's a little bit of a threat there. God is big and powerful, and these are God's weapons that God can use. Mm-hmm. And also a sense of, but if God is really the one who is in charge of the cosmos, then we trust maybe that these things are being used when necessary. The language there in verse 23 of reserved for a time of distress, for a day of battle and war, it's not clear to me who is being battled against there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One way to read it is just when human beings need to be put in their place, but I'm not sure. That's not really said there.
Yeah, I know. It makes me think of the plagues, but I don't know if that's what they have in mind.
This image in verse 25 and to 27 is about water coming to an uninhabited land and sprouting grass. So the God is making rain in the desert or something like that. That's that's such an interesting image. And like, given where we just were, I don't know. Why are we talking about rain in the desert, do you think?
What struck me in that was the emphasis, that it's in the wilderness where no person is, to saturate the desolate wasteland. Like, this is happening in a place where there is nobody. Like, people are not involved in this. And it does seem very much like a sort of new creation or another act of creation to have plants sprout up in a place where they haven't been before. And it has nothing to do with us.
I love that, Amy. And so this comes back to that sort of, this is a non-anthropological view of creation, that God tends to things and grows things and creates things that aren't about people or for people.
Right.
Which might also help with that issue we were just talking about in terms of like the day of battle and the day of war. Like, my little anthropocentric brain wanted to say, like, in case God needs to do something to humans. But maybe this is really just saying, like, humans aren't anywhere actually in this picture at this exact moment. Creation is just, it's its own sort of amazing thing without even reference to human beings at all.
Yeah. It's so hard to adopt that viewpoint.
It is very hard. Hard.
Yeah.
Because in Genesis 1, we were like the pinnacle of the created order with the like dominion over everything and God's image on the earth. And here we're just not even.
Yeah.
What do you make of this question about, does the rain have a father? From whose belly does the ice come? Which I assume is another womb sort of birth image, or does the ice have a mother? Is the answer to that question God is the father of the rain and the mother of the ice? Or is the answer to that question there isn't one? Or is the answer to that question that Job doesn't know? What do you think that imagery is up to?
Gosh, I mostly am just so captivated by the poetry of it. Does the rain have a father? Who begot the dewdrops? Mm-hmm. Like, that I just love it. In a way, coming from the conversation that we've been having, the thought coming to my mind right now is that it maybe is almost like sort of making fun of human. I mean, I don't think it's actually making fun, but I'm hearing it as sort of making fun of the human desire to describe everything in human terms.
Yes.
Like, we want to know what, like, we humans come from parents. So what about the rain and the dewdrops? They must also come from parents, and the ice must also, because I don't think there's never a claim, it seems like, here or in the other texts that we've read, where God is the creator. I mean, I guess it depends what you mean by creator of rain. God's not the creator of the water, but maybe allows rain to come. But it's just sort of like the categories are wrong. Like, the question is wrong.
Yes.
They're very poetic.
I love that. It's a very poetic way of saying you're asking the wrong question. Yeah.
Do you read that differently?
No, I think I like that reading of it a lot. I'm not sure I would have gotten all the way there without you, which is why I read with you.
Which is why it's better to read together.
Exactly. I think I got a little bit stuck there with, like, you don't know where the rain comes from.
Yeah.
But that your further step of you're thinking human questions or in human images about things that are beyond humans, I think is a really lovely way of reading it, and in keeping with what's been happening in the rest of this text. Because it is kind of silly, like, who gave birth to the ice? Like, when you think of it that way, like, that's kind of a weird thing to think. It's physically
uncomfortable to think about giving birth to ice. But I will also, to sort of temper myself, we were talking about, like, swaddling the watery heavens with clouds. So I don't know. Like, I don't want to push this in any kind of absolute way. Maybe that metaphor is useful here. But
I was thinking about that too. Which maybe we could read it that way, but you could also read it as, earlier in this poem we were talking about natural phenomenon in human terms. Like, it did come from a womb, it was swaddled. And now that we've kind of gotten our heads around that, now we're moving what to this possibility that what does even father and mother mean when we're talking about creation. Like I kind of like that sort of unraveling, sort of a slow unraveling of the human-centered imagery.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to find other terms to speak in. So in verse 31, we return to the heavens and we start thinking about astronomical phenomena, among other things. Can you bind Pleiades' chains or loosen the reins of Orion? Can you guide the stars at their proper times, lead the bear with her cubs? Do you know heaven's laws, or can you impose its rule on earth? Can you issue an order to the clouds so their abundant waters cover you? Can you send lightning so that it goes and then says to you, I'm here? Who put wisdom in remote places, or who gave understanding to a rooster? What? Hebrew uncertain. Reading. Who is wise enough to count the clouds, and who can tilt heaven's water containers so that dust becomes mud and clods of dirt adhere? So we started in the sky, we went all the way down to the depths. Now we're back in the sky, but we're like in the sky beyond the sky, talking about constellations.
Yeah.
How do you understand what we've done here, and what, like, leading the constellations around? How does that fit in with what we've been talking about?
I mean, I need to remind myself, as a person who is inside most of the time after dark, that, in ancient society and some modern societies, the constellations were not only quite present and maybe easier to see because we didn't have so many artificial lights all over the place, but they were the guide. Like you could know the seasons from looking at where they were.
Yeah.
You could know a travel route. It would show you, which way was east and west and whatnot. It's almost like when that sun goes down, you get this sort of map that appears in the sky to sort of show you where you are in time and show you where you are in space. So I think just the thought that sort of underlying map is reliant on God and to recognize, I don't know, I feel like it's easy to see with, like, at least for me, looking up at the stars, you realize how small you are. But to think about that enormity of that whole system and the importance of it to how we understand our place in the cosmos is it's a very awe-inspiring thing to focus on. I just said a lot of words there, Bobby, but I don't know if they came to mean anything. Do you draw anything in particular from these verses?
I love that imagery. My family went to the Badlands in South Dakota a few years ago, and just out with nothing, and did a star watching thing, and just you forget sometimes living in Little Rock that there are more than 10 stars in the sky, but it really is overwhelming. Yeah. So I think that sense of the enormity of it. There is also, an anxiety in some apocalyptic texts that are not too long after this part of Job was probably written, in which the stars they have agency. Maybe they're angels and they kind of start to do different things. Like I'm thinking about the astronomical book in Enoch. And so they don't keep track of time properly. And so then everything comes apart. And so there's a sense in which, the right structure of the world depends on the stars correctly identifying where you are in space and time.
Yeah.
And if that starts to go awry, then things get really off kilter. And so God is doing all of that for all of those stars all of the time. We talked a little bit in the Genesis 1 text about if you don't know what time it is, or if you live as though there are no seasons, then what does that do to creation? And I think you could imagine a similar sort of implication here, that God is keeping things on season, and they need to be on season. And humans don't have the capacity to do that. And I guess we have the capacity to ignore that, but we don't have the capacity to make that happen.
That's really helpful, Bobby, just to think of it as it's not just you wind the clock and it runs itself. but like this idea that God is actively involved in
Right.
time,
Right.
the unfolding of time.
Yeah, and like the eclipse a couple months back, and people were like, "Well, the next eclipse is going to happen at like this time of day on this, like 23 years from now at 2:00 in the afternoon," and like that's not how. So we're like, "Oh yeah, it all just moves itself." But that's not the way this text was thinking. It was definitely thinking about all of that depends on what God does when God wakes up this morning or whatever. That statement in verse 33, do you know heaven's laws or can you impose its rule on the earth? When I first read that, I was reading it as sort of like Torah, like the laws in heaven. But I've come to think that maybe this is talking about what we were just sort of talking about, like the seasons and the times and the order that is created in the heavens.
Yeah.
That have effect on the earth.
Yeah.
And humans are to respond to that, not to, like, we can't, in this text, I think we can't create that. So our job is to be
we
responsive.
can't mess with it, and we don't even really understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can recognize it at least.
We can recognize it, and we should respond. This text is not saying we should respond to it, but I think that's the idea. I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about is like, how does this text translate into a modern context, which we'll talk about in a minute. But, a lot of this stuff we now think we do know, and we know more certainly than Job's audience did. But like, I think we often think we can actually override the rule of the heavens or like the seasons or the changing of the times and just live in this sort of like timeless present. And there's implications to that. And this text is saying like, no, God is actually making all of that stuff happen. My favorite line here is in verse 36, who put wisdom in remote places? Like, I like that. And then my translation at least is who gave understanding to a rooster? So the first was like, wisdom is like far and distant and like, I don't know where it is. And then now we're talking about like a bird.
Yeah.
Other than being like, that's a funny thing, which is as far as I've really gotten with it. Can you enlighten us about what may be going on? I mean,
yes, I will say that the translation I have has it understanding, who gave understanding to the mind, but then also has the note, or a rooster.
Yeah, the CEV just
and this is actually a line that makes it into the daily blessings in the Jewish liturgy.
Oh, interesting.
And it is, blessed are you, God, who gives understanding to the rooster to tell day from night.
Oh, yeah,
like it is the rooster who sees the transition and lets us know what's happening.
I love that. That is so really helpful. Yeah, I love that. So then there's this sense in which like true understanding is like remote and distant and hard to grapple. And yet the rooster knows the thing that it's meant to know. And so, but it doesn't know the things that it's not meant to know. Like that's lovely. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that articulation a lot, Bobby.
I'm coming to think I have a bias against roosters.
It's a kind of a funny sounding word in English.
It is. Rooster.
Can I say one thing about in verse 35? Your translation was that I think the lightning says, I am here.
Yeah.
So that again, that is the Hebrew word that I'm like a little obsessed with.
Yes.
Hineni, that you can say, I am ready, I am here. It's translated in a lot of different ways, but that, Abraham says when he's called by God, and Moses says, and many of the prophets say. And for me, it evokes such a connection between the two entities involved in that exchange. Like there's no choice but to answer that to the person who has called your name.
Yes.
Because your self-definition is somehow tied up in them. So like it's such a close connection, and also imagining the lightning as being like one of the prophets. Like they are in God's service in the same way is I think a really different way to think about it, and quite lovely and expansive.
The other thing I love that now that you're pointing that out is, so in the way that it's phrased there, it's the lightning goes and then it says, I'm here. So in the Abraham story, it's I'm here and then go. But here it's the lightning has already responded before it's even taken time to say Hineni, which I think is an image about lightning and thunder, right? Like you see it go and then you hear it speak.
But
I
love that.
So like it's a really cool like way of talking about nature, but it's also this really like nature is so responsive that it does the thing it was told to do before it, like it's just immediate. And then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, here I am.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
So Amy, technically our task for today was to talk about care for the air and sky. And we have been talking a little bit about air and sky, but I feel like this text has gotten us into many, many things. And so I'm curious, thinking about that theme, but also just thinking about creation and humans and creation care. What do you want to leave us with in thinking about Job 38?
What this poem is really evoking for me is, for often out of necessity, I think, but sometimes to our own detriment, sometimes conversations about creation care at this moment in history make me feel bad, to be honest, because we're not doing a very good job.
Yeah.
And I am not doing enough. So it just brings up a lot of sort of guilt and overwhelm. And what I feel has been offered to me by this poem is, Job has a lot of things that he's dealing with, but he is a man in deep distress who feels abandoned by God, feels alone in his suffering. And the first thing that God says when God responds feels a little bit like this poem that is like, you're not alone. Like the whole world is here with you. It makes me think of this beautiful David Whyte poem, Everything is Waiting for You. And I'm just going to read you the first sentence of it. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone.
Oh, that's beautiful. And
then it goes on to talk about all the things around you that are sort of doing their thing. And if you attune yourself to them as like real, worthwhile, almost creatures. And I love that this text is not talking about creatures. It's talking about the sky. Like this, this is talking about what we would say are inanimate objects or force, whatever. But that there's a way that I think feeling them as part of God's creation and feeling our deep connection to them as other parts of God's creation can actually, help us with some of our loneliness and help us endure times that are really difficult and painful. And I think there's a lot that we can gain from attuning to these things in the beautiful world around us. And we need to do all the care stuff and all of that stuff. But I almost feel like this poem is a little bit of a respite that's just sit in the glorious awe of it.
Yeah.
And it is a balm for some really overwhelming suffering.
That's a really lovely interpretation, Amy. I love that.
What are you thinking about, Bobby?
I think that I'm reading this text as itself, maybe, and less in light of the book of Job as a whole. And I think it's interesting to both move it in and out of its context.
Yes.
I'm also thinking about it in terms of creation care, which is interesting because there are no humans in this text, right? The only human in this text is Job. And the point of this text is that Job was not there, right?
He's nowhere to be seen in any of this. Yeah.
There was this whole world when there was no Job, and there was not even any human. And, if you read the God speeches as a whole, here's the natural world was there, and then here's all these animals that don't need humans, and then it's Leviathan and Behemoth who are beautiful of their own, and then it's, who are created just like you. And so human beings only show up very belatedly at the end. And yet creation has this whole beauty and profundity and complexity to it that are just not that interested in humans or don't need humans to be in charge of it, which is very different than Genesis 1. I mean, that stuff was there in Genesis 1 before humans, but then humans were put in place. here are the senses that human beings don't know about the complexities, and that all of nature has its own integrity and its own life. And there's like beauty and chaos and new creation and forces of destruction that have their proper place, that is not related to human care or to human well-being. It's raining in the desert where humans have no use.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think about when I read this text is it asks a lot of questions that we kind of now do know the answers to, right? This text reads different in the 21st century than it did in the 5th century BCE. But I've started to think that maybe the more we think we know, the less we are able to actually take on board what this text is trying to say, which is, this text is not about human mastery of the world, as Genesis 1 maybe was. This text is about the integrity of nature, that human beings, the more we understand, the more we try to control. And this text is about you can't control it. And so maybe now that we think we can, and maybe now we actually can in some ways, we can do a lot of the things that this text says we can't do. And maybe that's not to the good of creation.
Yeah.
And so when I'm reading this text, I'm reading it a little bit as like leaning back into the not knowingness of it, and to find the beauty and integrity of creation and let it be mysterious and wonderful and like valuable in and of itself without reference to us, and to try not to get in the way, which is very different than dominion. It's stay out of the way, humans, right? Like stay in your proper place, and which we're not very good at doing, and I am not, and I am among those who are not very good at doing it. But to try to inhabit that, I think, would be an interesting challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Bobby. And I love that in relationship to that we're talking about the sky and the heavens and things that we can't, like if we were talking about the plants on the earth, then the question of our, quote unquote dominion gets a little more mixed up in, or our delusions of grandeur and what we think we're actually controlling and not. But I like that this really kind of takes that off the table.
Yeah. Like, can you make Orion move differently? No, I cannot.
Can you?
Oh, can I disrespect the seasons of the year that Orion is trying to alert me to? I can. That's right. Yeah, that's true. All right, Amy. So next week we're moving, I think, a little more grounded, so to speak. We're talking about Psalm 65 and care for the land and water. These texts all lend themselves to talking about many things, as you know, but that'll be our focus next time.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
Me too. Thanks, Amy.
See you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
We hope you'll join us again next time as we continue on with our series on creation care with a look at Psalm 65. Until then, keep on digging.